Between my, oh, there we go. It looks like I have some sound now. All right. Skip's here. James Pell, Bob, Leo, awesome. If you guys can hear me, somebody throw something and see me. Throw something in the chat. Ah, John saw me. Yes. Awesome. We've got, oh, we went down in number. How did that happen? Just barely started. All right, can you guys, somebody please throw something in there. Good evening from all. Oh, looks good, sounds good. All right, good. That's what I needed to hear. At least I know I'm actually broadcasting instead of just talking to myself while you guys kind of watch. Welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about thickness planers. And I'm going to bounce a little bit between a couple of them here. This is, for me, I've always said that the planer is the dumbest tool in the shop. And it is a single task tool. It doesn't do anything but make things parallel. It's got a table down here on the bottom. And I'm staying on the outfeed side of mine. I've got the Hammer A3 kicked up here. The tables for the joiner are kicked up, and I've got the covers and the guards and stuff off of this so that we can take a good close look at it as we go through here. But like I said, there's a table down below. It is set parallel to my cutter head, and the only thing this will do is make things a uniform thickness. So if I put in a board that is twisted, bowed, or cupped, it's coming out the other side a more uniform, twisted, bowed, and cupped. So that's the first thing I want you guys to know about the planer. It doesn't, unless you rig up some kind of jigs or fixtures that will immobilize the board and allow you to mill a flat surface, the planer by itself does not do anything except for make things parallel. So if you've got an 8-foot board with a half-inch bow over its length, you put it through the planer. If you haven't flattened it, it's coming out the other side. A more uniform thickness, but it's still going to have a half-inch bow to it over its length. So let me double check the chat here, make sure we've got a bunch of people. Yep. We've got voices in background. Is my voice in the background? I don't know. I am, as far as I know, Frank's here. What do you think of the Bob Wilkinson? Awesome. All right, we're doing good here. I'm going to switch. I don't want to switch my camera. I wanted to switch my microphone. Sorry, folks. I'm still hunting to make. Let's go back. Oh, all right. Now we go. Not to me. Sounds fine. Okay. I'm not sure what that all means. All right. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. I just wanted to make sure that everything was happening. I saw a bunch of stuff toss up there on the chat board, and I wanted to make sure that I was coming through loud and clear. I'm not getting anything on my camera here as far as my microphone sound. So what is going on? Do we have sound? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Now I'm getting, yep, now we're getting it. Okay. Dan says, I don't know. You guys are all saying it sounds fine, but I'm not sure exactly how that works because that's not working. I'm pulling it off. Let's see. Is that right? All right. I think I have it now. Does that sound a little better? Sorry. we've modern conveniences here. I've got 3 cameras, none of which actually have the microphones active, and I'm trying to find the correct channel for my my wireless mic here. So I'm not sure what happened, but there we go. Okay, good. Everybody's saying the sound is better, and it sounds great. So I will real quick run over that stuff again, very fast. My thoughts only. Planer is the dumbest tool in the shop. The only thing it does is make things parallel. It does not flatten boards. It does not remove twist. It does not remove cup, unless you rig up something to do so. And I don't really tend to do that because I've got a combination joiner planer, and as you'll see shortly, I've got a freestanding wider planer, and I'm going to show you a little. I'm going to show you a little trick with that as well. So what I do want to do is I want to switch cameras, and I want to come in on a close-up here, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the physical makeup of the vast majority of planers and things that you ought to check. And at that point, I'm going to move into what I do to make sure that I get the flattest, smoothest, straightest lumber possible. So I'm going to switch here real quick. Let's see if I get the right camera, because it's all just wonky this week. Yeah, that's the one. Wait, we're not supposed to be showing any of those. I don't know what happened here, folks. We just lost our menu. Come on, you. Tools. Output screen. Come on, one more. Let's. Nope, that's not it. Yeah, we're having fun here tonight. It's just all fun and games. All right. No, I don't. Come on. Off. Thank you. That's much better. Now you guys aren't seeing all the camera prompts on there. All right. So we are in the close-up mode now. I'm sorry if you're watching us on YouTube the day after or anytime after this was actually live. I apologize. I'm not sure exactly why things got all out of sync here tonight. I hooked everything up the same way I have for the last 6 months, and for some reason, some things are being weird. So pretty basic stuff here. You've got the cutter head, and this is a spiral cutter head, and this one happens to be Felder's silent power cutter head. It comes basically standard with any of their hammer or any of their Felder equipment. It's a proprietary spiral cutter head. You can see it's got just a massive number of cutters on this thing. There's no spaces in between them, which creates chips that are about half the size of a normal planer. And then on either side of that, this piece here is the dust chute. So normally it's folded over and on top here, so we wouldn't be able to see it. So I have it folded out of the way so that we can actually see what's going on. There's normally guards stuck on either side of here protecting the in-feed roller and the out-feed roller. And I'm not sure it's showing up on camera real well, but the in-feed roller has it is a coarser serration on there than there is on the out-feed roller, and that's so that it can grab the rough lumber and really just keep a grip on it as it's pulling it through there. Now, normally there is on a chip deflector and a guard over top of that here, but again, I had it removed because you would only see the guard. Usually on a straight knife planer, you would have something that wraps around on the in-feed side, which is akin to a chip breaker on a hand plane. And the idea is as that knife circles around and strikes the material, it's going to sever those long fibers of the board, and that chip breaker literally snaps the fibers off so to reduce tear out. But on this planer, and this planer only, because my other planer has a chip breaker on it, this one does not, because that's the way that Felder designed this hammer joiner planer combo. And I have had absolutely zero problem with tear out on this thing, as long as I was milling stuff of significant size. When you get down to 16th or 8th inch stuff, if you don't have it properly backed, it can start to tear out a little bit. So this head and the table are set parallel to one another. I'm pretty sure you can't see I'm going to tilt the camera down just a tiny bit and see if hopefully we can now you really can't see the bed here, the table. So when I'm setting up the planer, I'm going to come in with a gauge block. So what I normally do is I'll just mill a block to a very specific size, 4 inches, 6 inches, something like that. And then I will place it underneath of, number one, the cutter head, so that the block, and then I raise the table up until I can use a feeler gauge up against the body of the cutter head, and I'll check it on the left and the right and make sure that I get the same sort of tug against that feeler gauge between the table and the block. And then there are adjustments to the table and those things so that I can make it parallel. The other thing you'll want to have is your infeed roller. You want to have at the very bottom apex of this or slightly below it so that it grabs the material. These things there is a little bit of spring to them usually, so that when you go in, it grabs and lifts up so that it'll pull the material through it, put some downward pressure on that. Same thing on the outfeed side. We're going to try and get maybe a little bit farther away from the table than the infeed side. I don't want the outfeed roller putting an awful lot of pressure down there. I want it just enough to keep the material flat to the bed of my planer. And all of those things, and if I have a chip breaker on there, the chip breaker is usually set just a few thousandths below my infeed roller, because that way it's putting downward pressure on those fibers so that when the cutter head comes around there, it really does snap them off. And the whole idea here, and you'll have to check your own machine manual to find out what those exact tolerances are. But, the idea here is if I've got my infeed and my outfeed roller set at exactly the right height, according to the manufacturer's specs, I should just about eliminate the potential for snipe on either end. And that's something that I know a lot of people have problems with, particularly if they go to those benchtop. So somebody had already said something about the DeWalt 745, I think it was. I don't have one of those. Infeed roller, the same type of roller drives me nuts on a 24-inch Woodmaster. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about that here. Yep. Certainly will, Bob. All right. Yeah, I'm just running back through those comments real quick. So even on a benchtop planer, you should have some adjustments on these things. I don't own one, and I never have. It doesn't mean they're a bad thing. It just means that I've never had one because they weren't really much of a thing when I first got into this. And since I've always been a professional woodworker, it was always the kind of thing that was a little bit on the lightweight side for me. At my last shop, before I moved to Cincinnati and worked for Pop Wood, I had a 20-inch Grizzly planer, which you're about to see in a little bit, and I had a 30-inch Yates American planer. and those were my workhorses. The 30-inch was my everyday milling machine, and I had switched out. It started out as the Grizzly when I first started in business. Um, I mean, for the money, it was just an amazing machine and when you see it, I mean, it's still going after 30 something years at this point. I got it in 92, I guess. So 33 years. I can't beat that. Um, and I think I paid under $2,000 for it. So, and it's had a million people running it. Not quite. I mean, a little bit of hyperbole there. But we've run 100, 200,000 board feet of lumber through there in that time. And um, when I got the bigger planer, I switched it out to a helical head because at that point it became that's where I'm going to run my highly figured maple and stuff like that, because the helical head really reduces the potential for tear out, simply because those cutters are set in at a slight angle, and the ones on this have a slight arc to them. And as they come down, they're making a shear cut across the surface. And that in and of itself, because it's such a small cutter, it's not going all the way across and bluntly cutting perpendicular to the edges of the board. It cuts and leaves a much smoother surface. There's a lot smaller resistance on that piece as it on the riving as the cutter head comes around. And on this, and now both planers in my shop have helical heads in there, because I had switched the one out on the Grizzly to a bird head, which is perfectly fine. The surface that this planer leaves is light years ahead of what the bird has, and the fact that the chips are half the size means I can run twice as much lumber before my dust collector fills up. Again, personal preference here, but that's the nuts and bolts of why I do as much milling on this machine as I can. It's only 12 inches wide, so that limits a lot of what I can do here in the shop, which is why I have the Grizzly 20-inch, because even though I'm teaching classes and stuff like that, I do tend to still work with the students, and we use lumber that is more like what I would have used when I was building furniture full time for clients, which is wider, highly figured material. So the helical heads really help make sure that I come away with tear out free, smooth, flat surfaces. So the big thing is you need to have a joiner, and we're going to talk a little bit about that here as I go through. But the idea here is I've got the helical head here. I've got the table set up so that it's parallel to the head. The cutters in here are absolutely awesome. Most helical heads are similar in nature. The cutters on here are numbered 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. And as Bob mentioned in the chat, you can rotate them. So instead of switching out straight knives like I used to do on my Grizzly, now what I've got is I remove the center stud that holds the cutters in place here, and I rotate, clean out the socket, rotate, and I can get 4 sharp surfaces out of all of these knives before I have to go ahead and replace them. They're carbide. You're not going to send them out and have them sharpened. And even from Felder, they're pretty reasonably priced to buy new cutters for this. So it makes everything. I mean, it takes me about 15 to 20 minutes to rotate the cutters on this head. It's ridiculously simple. And I have a torque wrench that I use to torque them down so that I'm not splitting the, cracking and splitting the cutters on there. The whole idea here is the more accurately I have all of this stuff set up, once I mill a flat surface at that point, and we talked about that in the joiner episode here months ago, is I'm looking to make a flat surface. And that's what a joiner does. It makes things flat. And if I'm lucky enough to be able to set the fence up square, I can make things flat and square. But once I have a flat surface, I can mill this. And that's where I'm looking at that grain direction is when I'm flattening and then making sure that I'm going with the grain, not against it, even with the helical head, because even though I don't get a whole lot of tear out here, it's not non-existent if I work it in the incorrect direction. I get flatter, smoother, straighter lumber if I'm paying attention to that grain direction as I'm using the machine. These setups make sure that as I'm running that flattened lumber through here, I am getting, an absolutely parallel flat board out of this machine. So you can't use this strictly on its own unless you make some kind of a carriage that immobilizes the board from rocking and twisting and all that kind of stuff. And then at that point, you're really reliant on taking very light passes so that you don't sort of flex the board in the process of running it through. Again, not impossible. To me, it slows the process down to the point where I think I would feel like it's kind of painful to continue. Particularly if I'm milling a bunch of stuff for a really large project. So I've only got a 12-inch joiner, but I have a 20-inch planer and a 12-inch planer as well, which works for most things. If I'm going to, say I want to mill up a 16-inch wide board, what I need to do is switch to the other camera, and then I'll go over there and we can talk a little bit about that. I'm going to switch over to this one, I think. No, that wasn't the one I wanted. My cameras are in a different order for some weird reason. All right. And John said he saw the serrated metal infeed roller, the same type that drives him nuts on a 24-inch Woodmaster. So yeah, I've never had that problem on the hammer. I have had that on the Grizzly. I meant to show you that there are any kickback pawls just inside here. You can hear them. There are a whole bunch of little fingers, metal fingers, and what they do is they swing up out of the way, and that way, if something were to grab and pull and kick back, they dig in and kind of mess up the surface of the board because it still kicks back. So I was trying to tell you, okay, so if I have the 12-inch planer or 12-inch joiner, and I want to run. We're going to imagine this is a 16-inch wide board. I set it up to take one full pass at the 12 inches. Again, bear with me here. Use your imagination. And what I do is I take a deep cut and I make a nice flat 12-inch section here. And then on my planer, what I've got is I have a piece of plywood that has a little bit of finish on it and some wax. And normally I have a little block just screwed on there, and that whole thing just slides in. And what's going to happen is I'm going to take that rabbited section and hang it right over the edge of my board here. And then we're going to set up the planer and pass it through so that this flat surface, with all kinds of dust sticking to it tonight, so that this surface runs on my platen, and the unmilled surface is hanging over the edge. I can also do that. We have a couple of boards here. I have some MDF that I spray glued down some like 400 grit sandpaper on it. No cleat. And you can, for shorter pieces, you can sort of sandwich it together and then pass that whole assembly through the planer. And one of the things that I want to point out is my joiner is 12 inches wide. So let's say, I mean, this is about a 7 or 8 inch board here. So let's say I had a 6-inch joiner. A 6-inch joiner means I could do this technique with about an 8 or 9 inch wide board. You really don't want more than roughly 1/3 of the board hanging off the side, because at that point, there's a chance that when you put it in there, if even the rollers or the pressure, the chip breaker, pressure bar, could start to push down and roll the thing off. So you can't do a 16-inch wide board on a 6-inch joiner and expect it to remain flat. It's also going to, the farther this hangs out off of my platen, the more likely it is that it's going to flex under the pressure. Okay, so I'm going to turn this on and I'll show you how this works, and then I'm going to give you a couple of quick tips on what to do with. I've got just a longer piece of pine here that I had flattened on the joiner before I disassembled it to turn it into a preview of how the planer goes together here. So I'm going to turn this on. It'll get noisy. So I'm going to bring it over until I feel the rabbet catch the edge of my platen. I'm going to take it in, slowly raise up my bed until the feed rollers grab. That's why you want your feed rollers a little below the bottom of your cutter head. All right, and now I can advance the planer. One more time till we're nice. All right. All right, we got a couple of seconds until the dust collector sort of shuts off on me. But anytime now. There we go. So you'll notice that I was taking shallow passes, nothing real heavy. And the idea is I'm trying to keep that board down tight to the platen. And that way, as I pass it through, I'm getting a nice flat surface here. Now I have a tiny little bit of snipe right there. And that's because I didn't do what I'm going to talk about next. Once I get this surface down to the point where it's clean, I can now flip this board, remove the platen completely, and now I can work with it flat against my table. Okay, so if I've got this nice and flat, my board should be nice and flat against my planer table, and at that point I'm ready to go. A couple of things you want to be aware of. Like I said, as I'm putting it down, I don't want to get this surface up onto the platen. Now the dust collector is cleaning its filter. So I want to make sure that's not riding up on the platen. I also want to make sure that I have as much of this flattened surface onto that platen as possible, because if I get too far over, again, it's going to either flex or tip, which is going to make my the side I'm milling not quite flat. So I'm going to back up the camera here a little bit, and hopefully this dust collector. And this, folks, is why I need a quieter air compressor. All right, at least it's all done now. It wasn't awful. So again, the idea is I want to make sure that I've got that whole flattened surface pretty much fully engaged with that platen, so that this whole milled surface becomes nice and flat. Once it's flat and parallel, now I can flip this over and mill this off and then start at that point. What I'm going to do, I mill this down till it's clean. And again, I'm looking at my edge of my board and making sure that I'm running so that I'm working with the grain. So if I did that on the joiner, then when I ran it this way, the last end over the joiner, so I ran this on the joiner and see the rough sides on here. So this would have been the last side on the joiner. And then it gets turned completely around. I never removed my finger. Yep. So, right. Here's rough side, last end over the joiner. I'm doing it on camera so that I'm not removing it. That's the first end through the planer. Last end over the joiner, first end through the planer. And that keeps my fibers oriented properly so that I'm working with the grain. And that was what went down on the platen. Now when I want to mill off that other side, I want to flip it end for end and mill this down until I get that side flat. And then at that point, to get to my final thickness, every time I run it through, I'm going to flip the board end for end in order to keep those fibers oriented so that I'm cutting with the grain instead of against it. If I spin it this way and put it back in, I've just turned the thing around and now I'm going against the grain. So flip it end for end after you've milled the second side flat. Make sense? All right. Now, a little bit of snipe there, because as I was coming out the other side, one of the things I didn't do was lift up a little bit because the platen was in the way and I didn't reach under there. I was watching the camera to make sure that you guys are actually seeing what was happening. So I want to back this camera up just a tiny bit if I can. Get a little bit. Yeah, you don't need to see the base. All right, there we go. So I've got my long board flattened here. And what I want to do, and I'm going to throw this one off to the side. So I jointed this starting here down to that way. So this would have been the last end over the joiner. So that needs to be the first end into my planer. What I want to do is, as I feed it in, I want to give a little support and even just slightly lift up on it as I feed it in. When it comes out the other side, and I know you can't see this, but I'm going to do the exact same thing. As it comes out there, I'm going to reach my hand down and I'm going to lift up on the end of that board just slightly and pull it, and it's going to come through, and I'm going to have no snipe on either end. Unlike a jointer, if I run across the joiner and I have snipe at the beginning, what that means is my outfeed table is too low it's too high. Confusing myself. As I push across the joiner, if I get snipe on the front end, that means the outfeed table is too high because I'm going to hit, rise up, and keep on going, and that's what causes the snipe on the leading end of my board. If I get snipe on the trailing end of my board, that means my outfeed table is too low. So what's happening is it's coming off that infeed table and it drops, and I snipe that last end. If you don't know what snipe is, it's where we grab the board, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to see this even in raking light, but there's a tiny little divot here. It's only a couple of thousandths. This whole surface is flat till about here, and then it just dips down. And the problem was, as I said, when it was coming out the other side, I didn't lift up a little bit on it because I was busy watching and I really didn't have my hand on it. It's a short board. So I didn't have it as it was coming out like I should have. If I would have just had a little bit of upward pressure on that thing as it was coming out the other side, it wouldn't have been able to pop down and take a divot out of that end. So if I'm doing that with a longer board, so this is about 3 feet, 2.5 feet. So I'm going to feed in, lightly lift up, and as it comes out the other side, I'm grabbing the leading end and I'm lifting up slightly so that I don't, it's not dropping down. And the longer the board, the more you're going to need to be able to lift up a little bit on it as it goes in and comes out of the planer. So at that point, even with a 20-inch planer, if I'm doing 6-foot long pieces, I'm running them 1 or 2 at a time so that I can feed them in and lift up. And as they're coming out the other side, I'm lifting up, coming out, and I'm not going to load this thing up with, 15 pieces of wood and hope I can grab them all as they come through. I'm going to do smaller groupings so that I can handle it, particularly if I'm milling by myself. Okay. Boy, 35 minutes in and we're kind of there. I'm going to switch back to the front camera here and Larry's here late. So kind of like class, Larry, kind of like class. All right, there we go. All right, I'm going to move so you guys aren't watching the back of me. I'm going to move my computer kind of on the screen here. I'm going to go back and look and see what kind of questions we had. Oh, John had that thing about the serrated roller. So yeah, so that in-feed roller, he's saying that on his Woodmaster, he ends up getting a lot more. He gets that indentation from that thing. I've never had that problem here. What that sounds like to me is you've got that in-feed roller set a little too low, and it's really putting a lot of downward pressure on that piece. So that in and of itself, if you're setting those in-feed and out-feed rollers and you've got them set too low, that's going to cause that board to flip up. If the in-feed roller is too low, it's going to cause that board to flip up and then drop down as it starts to go in, which is going to cause some snipe at the front end. If the back end has the same thing, now when that front one lets go, the back roller is down too low and it's going to pop that board up into the cutter. You're going to get snipe on the trailing end of your board. So maybe look at exactly how much pressure you have and how much below the arc of the cutter head you have the in-feed and out-feed rollers set. If you're getting those really heavy roller marks on there, it sounds to me like you've just got it set, a bit too low. I did Bob's thing. John also says he has a shop in New Hampshire that I do not heat during the winter. Several years ago, I put a bird Sheelix head on my joiner up there. When I returned in the spring, the carbide inserts had cracked. Yeah, well, so I think I talked before. If I haven't talked about it here, I know I've talked about it in a lot of the presentations I've done about wood expanding and contracting. I think we had a discussion about it when I did the joiner thing. Wood expands and contracts based on the humidity in its environment. Metal expands and contracts due to the temperature. The only way that temperature really affects the wood is warm air holds more moisture than cold air. So it's just the way it is. So my shop is climate controlled year round, and it never gets cold enough that things are going to shrink up and start having a problem on my joiner or my planer with those carbide inserts. My guess is it got cold enough in your New Hampshire shop that when things started warming up, something expanded or something contracted too much, and that's what caused those carbide inserts are actually fairly brittle. If you over tighten the screw that holds them in, you can crack them. and it happens pretty fast. So that's why I definitely use a torque wrench on here, just so that I can make sure that I've got the proper torque down there so that I'm not cracking those inserts. And if they were a little over tightened when the thing started contracting due to the cold temperatures in your shop, that could have caused a problem too. Mike Michelle's here. Awesome. Hopefully you're here for more than just moral support. John says he didn't notice prior to starting it and was grateful he wasn't. Yeah, that's a good idea. Better to be lucky than good. Any suggestions? Nope, stick with the luck. About 9 of the individuals cutters cracked. So if it was me, and I knew that I was going to shut down my shop for an extended period of time in the winter and not going to keep the place conditioned, I would consider just giving these things a slight loosen to let them sit until I come back in. Again, it's not like you're running stuff through there and you're going to get a ton of dust trapped between the cutter and the socket. So at that point, you come in to start working in the shop, you're going to heat the place up, heat it up, open up the head, torque them down real quick, and then you're right back to work. So better to be safe than sorry. Oh, Patrick's here. Awesome. Suggestion for best table lubricant that won't affect finishes. Boy, John, you're talky tonight. That's cool. I like that. So I use paste wax, much to Felder's chagrin on this. They have a very lightweight kind of an oil thing they call metal glands that they spray the surface and it conditions it and lubricates it at the same time, sort of helps remove some of any minor surface rust that's in there. And that's what they suggest. You could also use something like Super Glide or any of those things on there, but I tend to stick with, just plain old Minwax paste wax. It's I just use the clear stuff on here, put it on, buff it off, and I have never in a couple of thousand pieces of furniture milled up all the lumber on my planers, all of my planers throughout and all my joiners throughout my career. Never had a problem with anything sticking to the wood because I'm not leaving this as a final surface anyway. Whatever comes off of here is either going to get planed, scraped, sanded, some combination of those things in order to remove any minor contaminants. I would try and stay away from anything silicon based because silicone just tends to permeate deeper into the cells. But even there, if you dry it and you buff it off, the transfer is pretty minor. But I tend not to, just because I know people have said they've had some difficulties with it. Let's see what else we got there. Boxcar Jimmy's here. Hey. It was great to meet you at Hearn Hardwoods this past weekend. Yes, folks, I was down there at Hearn Hardwoods open house on Friday and Saturday, and it was a blast. There were a ton of you who watched Tuesday Night Tips that came and stopped by and said hello, Boxcar Jimmy being one. So it was awesome. Anybody like to skew their work piece with a wide planer like that? Yes. So that was what I was going to say earlier when I was talking about the fact that the inserts on the helical head are set slightly askew and they have a slight arc to them. So they're getting that shear cut. When I had the 30-inch Yates and we were milling anything smaller than 30 inches, which was almost all the time, very rarely did we have something that was exactly 30 inches wide. Because it was a straight knife, if I skewed the board going through there, you get a smoother surface out of it because you're getting more of that shear cut coming across the board. Again, not always, because I think we talked about this in the joiner session when we, when we impose the grain direction onto a board by sawing the log into rectangular shapes, there's no guarantee that all the fibers are perfectly lined up parallel to the edges. So you can still get some tear out, but it greatly reduces the tear out. Another tip is if you're doing something like curly maple, you could take a rag and just soak it in some water and just very lightly wet the surface and then run it through the planer. Don't wet the surface that goes down to the table because that just causes rust. And I'm talking about the surface that's facing up towards the cutter head. And what it does is it softens up those fibers just enough. And you're not hosing it on there. You're not puddling it up. It's just dampening that surface enough to get those fibers a little soft so that they shear off rather than tear out. Hopefully that helps. Let's see what else we got there. Vincent says he's able to eliminate snipe on the back end by loading a board of the same thickness right behind the project. Yes, that's also a thing. If you're running shorter boards and you butt them end to end as they go through, but that very last one that you have coming out the other end, make sure you give it a little lift up on the outfeed side, and that'll stop that final board from one of the fellows in the class today was talking about is, hey, you're going to talk a little bit about snipe tonight because, I hate making things 6 or 8 inches too long just so I can eliminate the snipe after I'm done milling. And I said, yeah, give a little lift up on the way in, a little lift up on the way out, and you'll see, and you'll figure it out. You'll lift up a little bit. You might get a little snipe, so lift a little harder the next time. And those benchtop planers, maybe you might have to lift up a little more than I would on a big stationary planer like this. So let's see what else we have there. Hey, that's it. We're done. Look at that. That's all the questions? Boy, that was quick. Let me see. There's nothing further back there. Nope. Wait, I just saw a question. What's the feedback? I don't know, Vincent. I'm not sure what that. There was feedback? Maybe it was when I was having trouble with all the with my mic wasn't working right. So hopefully everything was cleared up there. Like I said, I set everything up the same as I did 2 weeks ago when I was here, and I do appreciate you guys sticking with me, even though I missed last week. It's been a tough few weeks. A few of you know what's been going on. But everything's looking good, and we should be back at this on a regular basis again. Hey, look at that. We're 47 minutes in, and we're kind of coming to it there. Well, thanks, John. I mean, that to me, that's just. I mean, you might even want to do that like on your table saw and stuff too, because when you think about it, if you tighten the arbor nut down pretty hard on there, and then things contract, you might have a hard time getting it off. So once again, if you just get into the habit of loosening things up, like here where I've got the lock handles so that I can lift and lower the joiner bed on this. If I was going to shut this down for a month or two in January, February, and not leave the heat on in my shop, if I was just going to turn everything off and let the building be what it is, I would probably loosen the locks on stuff, make sure that I have nothing locked down. Things are floating free so that as the metal contracts due to the cold, and we get pretty cold here in the Poconos, I don't have a problem when things start to warm up that something's now bound up because something's expanding faster than else, or conversely, as it gets cold in here, something contracts a lot quicker, and now something is either bound up and I cannot get it apart, or something cracks and now I have a problem. It's just it's kind of like making sure that you're not binding up wood when you're doing a cross grain molding or something like that. You're not, if you screw the moldings on, you're going to crack the case side, but if you nail them on, the nails have a little bit of flex, you know, and that way, or, you know, a lot of people only glue like the first third and, you know, something like that, so that it allows the movement. You got to think of metal the same way. It doesn't move. It's not as significant a change in dimension, but the tolerances on the metal, on the machines and stuff, are a whole lot tighter than you can get with your woodworking. So if you're gonna go through all that trouble and allow your furniture pieces to expand and contract without exploding, why not try and get into the habit of doing that same kind of stuff with your power tools, so that you're not causing yourself trouble down the road. Any other questions there, folks? Yeah, Bob, it's the same, right? Same as draining the pipes in a summer house in Maine. We got that for the winter, right? If I was gonna, that's exactly what I thought when I was standing here saying, yeah, if I was gonna shut my shop down and turn the heat off and everything for January and February in here, the first thing I would have to do was winterize the bathroom and the utility sink here. So for me, you know, even though it causes higher electric bills and heat bills for here into the shop, because I'm running mini splits, even though those electric bills go up considerably in the dead of winter, to me it's worth it, so that I don't have condensation on my machines. Because if I turned it off and I walked in here in mid-February and said, I need to work today, so if I threw the heat on for half an hour, not only do I have all of that metal warming up and expanding, but I've also got, now all of a sudden I'm introducing more, you know, condensation, because the metal is going to get hot, quicker the air is going to, you know, it's going to hit the cold metal first, and then it's going to condense, and then I've got water, you know, condensation build up on my machines and all of that kind of stuff. So doesn't hurt to just kind of, you know, plan for stuff like that ahead. So if I was going to shut this down for a couple of months, I'd probably loosen up the cutters on there, loosen up my arbor nuts on all my saws. I don't know that I would take the tension off my band saws, but I don't do that anyway. That I'm not too worried about something fetching up, but I might loosen up all the locks on the guides and stuff like that, so that nothing gives me problems down the road. So yeah, rust. Michael says he has the 16-inch joiner planer combo, but prefers his 20-inch Powermatic helical head planer for planing, as it's easier on my back. Yeah, well, that's so. I don't know if I talked about this. I don't remember if I talked about it in the joiner show or not. I love my A3. I've never had a problem with it. I don't mind switching it over. So I have the A331. Sounds like you have the 41 if you're 16 inches. I'd actually like to try and upgrade mine to a 41 at some point. And it's a good bit longer than this, so that means it's going to be a bigger footprint in here. So I got to decide if that's worth it or not. That was kind of the reason I went with the 31 to begin with, is that the footprint's small enough that I don't give up enough real estate that it's hard to get around it. To switch over is fine. You're right. The bed on this is a little lower than it is on my 20-inch Grizzly. The Grizzly I've just had forever. Again, it doesn't owe me a thing. That was my primary planer for, I don't remember how many years before I got the Yates. And then at that point, the Yates was, I'm trying to think, it was 2004. So probably 12, 13 years we used the Grizzly as our primary planer. I mean, I looked at a whole bunch of others, trying to figure out what to to really have. And the more I looked, the more I didn't like the return on the investment. I mean, I looked at SCMI and all of those things early on, and it was like, okay, for a 20 or a 24-inch planer, you're, tens of thousands of dollars. And this thing, like I said, if I remember right, it was about $1,750. I know they're not that today, but once again, that was 1992 versus 2025 going into 26. So it's really, it was a bargain, and it has more than paid for itself 10 times over. And I wouldn't get rid of it for any amount of money. It's kind of like my Powermatic 66. I love my Hammer K3 slider, but I just can't bring myself to get rid of that Powermatic 66. And it was a workhorse for a long time. And it's still a great table saw. Same thing with my 20-inch planer. It's a great machine. I would love to have a Felder planer, but boy, I would be really hard pressed to pull that Grizzly out of here if I went ahead and pulled the trigger on a Felder 20 or 24-inch planer. It doesn't owe me a thing, but I know all the idiosyncrasies of it, and it's just a great little machine for the money. How about I'm sorry, John, I missed that. Let me see. I saw something about you wanted to know about a sled for a bench top planer. And Charles answered, okay, so has anyone built a sled for a bench top? Charles Wilson said he has. Yeah, so the sled idea, isn't a bad thing. The biggest problem you've got is the longer it gets, the harder it is to keep it rigid enough that it's not going to bounce around as you're trying to, or flex up and down as you're trying to do something longer. I'm not a huge fan of the sled thing. I mean, if you can afford to, for a bench top or a stationary, a stationary planer, simply because it's got lots of limitations and it takes a long time to set up. If you've got room for a stationary planer, this is kind of a hard combo to beat. And that's, we were talking earlier about the fellow with the 16-inch version of this. If you didn't have the room for a 20, and all you had room for was a 12 or a 16-inch like this. So it's a 12-inch joiner, but it's maybe about 20 inches wide, and it's like 55 to 59 inches long, depending on where I measure. It doesn't take up a whole lot of real estate, and it's a lot of machine for the money. And again, having gone out for years and years with the woodworking shows, when I was hauling this one around to the different shows with me every weekend, I would have half a dozen people walk up to me and just go, I've got that same exact machine. Absolutely love it. And, it's quick and easy to switch over. And there's really, it helps you flatten things the right way instead of trying to make do with whatever kind of a sled you can build up. I get it. Not everybody can afford that or have the real estate for it. So you do what you got to do. I mean, a lot of the time, when I had the other shop before I went to Cincinnati, I had a 16-inch joiner in there, but there were a lot of time, I had 30-inch planer. So there's that disparity between the width of my joiner and the width of my planer. Not that anybody ever made a 30-inch joiner, but you know, if I'm doing a 20-inch board, you still have to do that large rabbeting operation and then use the platen over on the planer, even though it's a 30-inch planer. And it, you know, the longer those pieces are, the harder it is for that stuff to maintain flat. Kind of like with the sled that you're talking about. I mean, the longer you make those things, the wider you have to make it, the harder it is to not get flex out of the sled itself. Yeah, well, even Charles said, okay, so, you know, he has to have someone on the infeed and someone on the outfeed side. Yeah, so I mean, I get it. You know, a lot of the times when I'm doing this, I don't even go over to use the platen on there. So John says the guy who wrote the article said it was a great idea. Best thing he'd ever done was make a sled for his planer. Sometimes when I if I do that rabbeting operation on here, I just go over to the bench and grab my scrub plane and knock that extra area down. I'll grab that board. So before I go to the sled, you know, to the platen on here, I can just scrub that off with a scrub plane or a smooth plane down to the jointed level, and that way I don't have to worry about even running it through the planer with the platen. I tend to try and eliminate that kind of nonsense as much as possible. Sometimes it's just not possible. So, you know, if you're working at home and all you've got is a benchtop planer, make yourself a sled and do the best you can, or break out some hand tools and give it a shot that way. For me, because I'm trying to mill material for classes that I'm teaching here, there, and everywhere, you know, I tend to have a few of these extra aids here that I can quickly and easily set up, run through, and get my work done and get it done accurately. So again, it's just a lot of it's personal preference and how much you want to budget and how much real estate you want to budget for whatever machines you can put in your shop. So no wrong ways to do any of this stuff. Combinations of power tools, hand tools, all hand tools, all power tools, all of those things work together. So Michael says the A341 joiner planer was the best investment he made, other than when he hit the mid 70s, back started bothering me. Yeah, I got you there. Laguna joiner planer, ended up requesting them from seeing back, hated the aluminum fence. Yep. Okay. You know, I've never messed with the Laguna joiner planer combo. The only other one I messed with was the Jet. I have the hammer. That'll tell you how much I like this. This machine's just unbelievably simple and very, very accurate, which to me was the whole. If it was complicated to switch over, it wouldn't be here. All right, so here we are. I don't even know what time it is now. We're 9:04. I've managed to stretch this out into an hour and 5 minutes again. So if there are no other questions, which I think we're doing okay, I'm going to call it a night. I have a class in here, and I'm going to try and get back at it first thing in the morning. So that means I got to clean all this stuff up tonight. I do appreciate you coming. If you are watching this recorded on YouTube or Facebook, please head over to YouTube, like and subscribe to this video. Make sure to ring that notification bell because you don't want to miss any of this. And next week, I keep flip-flopping whether I want to do something on routers or whether I would actually like to do some more stuff with the Shaper Origin. I know that, there are some folks out there that find that to be, uh, you know, they consider it cheating, but, to me, it's just another tool. And I think I've got some really cool ideas. So maybe that's what I'll play with next week. I will see you guys on Tuesday night next week at 8 o'clock, and I'm going to play around with the Shaper Origin and give you a few more neat little ideas and things that I like to do with it. Um, Hope to see you then. Thanks for coming.